The rate and depth of breathing is controlled by the brain. Sensory receptors, called chemoreceptors, monitor the levels of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the body. Central chemoreceptors are located in the medulla oblongata in the brain, which is it's attached to your brain stem. These chemoreceptors are sensitive to change in the carbon dioxide content of the blood. In most people, a rise in the level of carbon dioxide in the bloodstream is the stimulus that triggers the respiratory center of the brain. When the level of carbon dioxide in the blood is increased, a person breathes faster and deeper to get rid of the carbon dioxide and bring in more oxygen, which is necessary for cell function. Peripheral chemoreceptors, located in the carotid arteries and arch of the aorta, monitor changes in carbon dioxide and oxygen levels. However, their most important role is in monitoring the level of oxygen in the blood. Peripheral chemoreceptors exert little control over ventilations until the level of oxygen in the blood has dropped very low. When the brain senses a rise in carbon dioxide levels in the bloodstream, it sends a signal to the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles, which the intercostal muscles are muscles in the ribs, causing them to contract. The diaphragm is the dome-shaped muscle below the lungs and above the abdominal cavity. It is the main muscle of respiration, and it separates the chest cavity from the abdominal cavity. The external intercostal muscles are located between the ribs, and the internal intercostal muscles and abdominal muscles may be used during forceful exhalation. When the diaphragm and external intercostal muscles contract, the chest cavity enlarges and fills with air. This causes the pressure within the lungs to decrease as compared to the pressure outside of the body. Air begins to rush in from the area of higher pressure outside of the body to the area of lower pressure in the lungs, normally entering the body through the mouth and nose. This process is called inspiration. Inspiration is considered an active process because it requires muscle contraction. Inspiration stops when the respiratory muscles stop contracting, air pressure inside the chest cavity and outside the body equalizes. So when the pressure outside of the body equals the same pressure inside of the thoracic cavity, the inspiration ceases. Oxygen and carbon dioxide are then exchanged in the lungs, and when the diaphragm and external intercostal muscles relax, the chest cavity becomes smaller and the lungs are compressed. As a result of the pressure within the chest cavity, excuse me. I just need to take a quick breather here. As a result, the pressure inside of the chest is higher than outside the body, and the air is forced out through the mouth and nose. This is the expiratory process. Expiration is normally a passive process because the lungs recoil and as a result of the elasticity. Now, if you look up here, you can see some muscles that go up along the neck and around the shoulder. Those are the sternocleidomastoid muscles. If somebody's having a lot of trouble breathing, you'll see them actually using these muscles to breathe, the sternocleidomastoids. So normally we use the diaphragm. You may see some abdominal muscles being used, and that shows some moderate distress. Then you have your intercostal muscles, which are the ribs. That shows a pretty good amount of stress. And then the sternocleidomastoid muscles, which shows an immense amount of stress. Structures that support ventilation include the chest wall, pleura, diaphragm, intercostal muscles, phrenic nerves, pulmonary capillaries. Respiration is the exchange of gas between a living organism and its environment. There are two types of respiration, internal and external. Internal respiration is the exchange of gases between blood cells and tissues, and external respiration is the exchange of gases between the lungs and the blood cells. Alveoli are the sites where gas, oxygen, and carbon dioxide are exchanged between the air and the blood. And this is our external respiration. Red blood cells, also known as erythrocytes, contain hemoglobin. Honestly, I think contain hemoglobin is a little off it. Red blood cells are also known as hemoglobins. Hemoglobin is an iron-containing protein that chemically bonds with oxygen. About 97% of the oxygen in the body is bound to hemoglobin molecules. The remaining 3% of the body's oxygen is dissolved in the liquid portion of the blood called plasma. Each red blood cell has about 250 million hemoglobin molecules, and each hemoglobin molecule can carry up to 4 oxygen molecules. Thus, hemoglobin is the part of the red blood cell that picks up oxygen in the lungs and transports it to the body cells. Carbon dioxide is the waste product from the body's cells, and it is transported in the bloodstream in 3 forms. Most of the body's CO2, again carbon dioxide, is transported in the blood as bicarbonate, which is created when CO2 combines with water. Some of the body's CO2 is transported on the hemoglobin molecule, and a small amount of CO2 is carried in the plasma as dissolved gas. Each alveolus is surrounded by a network of pulmonary capillaries. Each time you breathe in, oxygen-rich air enters the alveoli, and blood low in oxygen enters the pulmonary capillaries from the alveoli. As they expand, the alveoli become thinner, making the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide easier. While oxygen is delivered into the cells, red blood cells gather up carbon dioxide and transport it to the lungs, where it's removed from the body when it's exhaled.